1, and welcome everyone on the line too. And the first item of business is approval of the minutes. Is there, everybody had a chance to look at the minutes from our last executive committee meeting? Okay, Judy Poe moved to approve the minutes. Is there a second? Ed seconded the motion. Florida. And all in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, it's unanimous with who's here. Okay, the next item is the ad hoc committee on litigation. And Brian, who do I need to call on? I will report we got a meeting on December 4th.
Are we going to go into closed session and talk about that?
Are we going to go into closed session and talk about that? Okay.
Typically, yes.
Okay. So do I have a motion to go into closed session to talk about the litigation?
So moved.
Okay. Ed made a motion. You second. All in favor say aye. Go into closed session. Aye. Okay. Unanimous. Okay.
On now with the general counsel from DMA, and I know that some of you folks that got here early were just in a meeting trying to get some things worked out with that. So, we can.
We will go on to the next item number.
Yeah, I mean, we can just, irregardless of that, we'll get everybody all caught up on that. And I know in many people's minds, the letter is kind of this point that allows certain things to go forward, but for the sake of discussion, let's say, that's not going to be an issue. We're going to get that, and we still have to plan for all of these things in the very, near term. So
wouldn't the, just as a point of discussion for today, target the retreat in February as a possible place where the newly reconstituted board could take place, and then the current board would have their last meeting possibly in January and do some type of recognition of outgoing members at that time, and then so January to February type time frame. Again, and the same sort of Texas you pointed out, Brian.
yeah, I mean that gives a little reading room.
How do y'all feel about that? Is that reasonable? You think? I mean, we could tell folks tonight that
We'll have one last meeting.
we'll, one last meeting, I mean, in January, and then we'll also recognize those board members that are outgoing members, and then we'll set a date for our retreat. Actually, we need to set it before then, so Jill can have it planned out for us and give us the July. It does the same thing to me too. But sometime in February, and then that'll count as our second meeting in February. And then we could do some training, maybe have Mark come, Fox, or
We could do,
whatever we need to do.
that February, it's like we've done before.
Right,
We usually had a short board meeting as part of that retreat.
right.
We could do that, or we could actually have a whole board meeting and have a retreat. I mean, either way you want to do it.
Let's do that so we don't have to have two meetings.
Okay. So we'll have a board meeting, and then that will be, maybe we do that like on Friday night.
Right.
And then, whatever else we can get done on Friday night, and then Saturday have the retreat. Okay.
Can't see it.
I took the liberty, the last page in your packet is just a list of the board meetings for 2014. I thought that a whole list needs to go out to the board at least. February may not be determined at this point, but I just thought what we know, so people can definitely get it on their calendars. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to review that or think about that.
Where do you plan on having the retreat? Do you know?
Where? Well, I took the liberty, I called where we had it last year at Blue Ridge. The only date that they have available in February is February 7th, which is early. We had a January board meeting in the you know, the 4th, that would be just 2 weeks later for the next.
I don't think that gives us enough time.
Right, but that's just that's just that location.
What about there's another place, location that we had the retreat, the hotel, that was.
Done that before?
Right, well, and what I'm thinking is give a couple of dates, and then I'll find the location.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The location shouldn't drive, in my opinion, the location shouldn't drive the date.
Right.
The current meeting scheduled, or the date of the current meeting scheduled, I think it's like the 27th or 28th of February.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we did it,
So let's say we're gonna find a place for that, the 28th is a Friday?
Uh-huh.
So let's say we'll find a place, come hell or high water on the 28th, the 28th and the 29th.
Okay,
28th and the 1st.
Okay.
It's not a leap
Right.
year.
right.
I think the
That's
NACO meeting.
February, March.
Are you going to the NACO meeting?
Okay, now just, so we cover
Right.
all the stuff here. Are we gonna have responses back from every county on the slate of officers? No, we're not. Does that matter? Well, it matters in terms of however much anybody feels about it.
Right.
And I don't say that to minimize, it just, the law does not require, no one believes the law explicitly states that you have to have all counties, so, you know, it doesn't matter, I guess, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, you understand? Okay.
Do you know how many we've
The latest
from?
count?
Yeah, what's the count?
Well, and again, the notion that some counties have said that they're not even gonna bring it up. You may or may not bring it up, but they're certainly not gonna bring it up until we get the letter from the secretary. So, just to cover all the
Right.
pieces here.
It's, to my knowledge, it hasn't changed since, it's still 14.
Okay, we have 14 counties that have approved a
I'm not sure they can hear you, Rick.
We got 14 counties that have approved the new board. Can you hear me on the phone?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, those counties are Alexander, Allegheny, Ashe, Caldwell, Jackson, Macon, Buncombe, Henderson, Madison, Mitchell, Polk, Rutherford, Transylvania, and Yancey. We also have 2 counties that were opposed, Watauga and Clay counties. So,
I think that's the same as what it was last
Yeah,
year. This month,
yeah.
there's been no action. Okay, so we'll see if there's any additional action after we get, you know, the letter from the secretary. And we'll probably know a lot more about that when Tracy gets back in the room. I mean, the other piece is obviously the bylaws. I know Allison, you know, you did some work on that, Jay. You know, it's at some point, so I guess, you know, whatever anybody needs to do to kind of stage things so that, you know, would that be something in that February meeting that you'd adopt the new bylaws? Okay, so you got a goal line.
I think that, I know in the current bylaws, it indicates that there is a bylaws committee. So I don't know if that would be something that we would want to even get sort of an ad hoc committee of the new group together to review before then. I just don't know. It depends on what the pleasure is of the board. Or whether we just want to take it
I don't
to
know how you
the
do it.
board as, you know, as drafted. It's the same bylaws.
Pretty much the
Pretty
same.
much, except, there's some things from Western that I think were, you know, we put in there that may have been, I think, a little bit easier in terms of what the structure of the agenda would look like and so on. And then also, obviously the changes from 208 this year, and I think this was 191 last year, just to reflect the composition of the board training requirements, that sort of thing. And so it's got all of that.
maybe what we do is, maybe we wait till after the January meeting, and then we could talk about it as we go to the retreat, and we can
Circulate it and then have, yeah.
have a conference, even have to have a conference call maybe about it. There's another point, I guess, about bylaws, just to mention is, election of officers. Normally, we do that in
December.
December, but because of the change, we haven't done that yet. So what my thought was we would wait until we have new bylaws and reconstitute the board and do that in February.
Right, the
Is that,
board,
is that, I mean, from
the
a
board
legal-
can choose to waive a particular provision of the bylaws, but it needs to be by majority vote. And
So we
so
need to-
today, you can vote and say, based upon the change composition, we will be, revising the bylaws and electing officers after that, and that should be fine.
Is that,
Don't you
Do that
agree?
in the rec committee?
But our,
Yes.
yeah, but our specific bylaws say, with the majority, simple majority vote, that you can, change or not have to follow a specific provision.
okay,
of the bylaws.
okay.
We're talking about
Excuse me?
revising the bylaws.
It's Maggie Faulkner, I just joined.
Hi, Maggie.
Talking about revising the bylaws for approval in January. Is that up
No,
to
that's a retreat.
That's a
That's a
retreat,
retreat.
okay.
Okay.
And Rick, you're supposed to appoint, like you said, a bylaws committee, an ad hoc committee.
Okay.
So at some point in time, you need to say this is who that is too.
That could be appointed, like you're saying, maybe in January, and they could meet over the phone even if they had to,
Okay.
prior to the board retreat.
Agreeable people would be plenty. Okay.
Interesting how they
What
change.
else? What else do we need, Brian? What do we need to say anything else about?
Well, let's see. Let's do one other piece of business, and then between Tracy and I, we can try to give you the boiled down version of the consolidation agreement where we've gotten to with that. It's comedy papers. Some of the members that were at Pinehurst met with the members that just happened to be present from Partners and Centerpoint. And one of the outcomes of that meeting, and we had, the CEOs had talked about this anyway, and I think it all just makes sense, is that going forward, and that would mean that probably in, let's say for the sake of discussion, January, we would have a meeting of a designated group of board members from each of the MCOs and begin the process of kind of the board-to-board work that needs to be done in relationship to the partnership, the Western Regional Partnership, that is. So I've got an email from Betty Taylor, and they've selected their folks, and I can tell you who that is.
And we were gonna recommend Ronnie, Bill, and Andy Stone.
Yeah. And yourself, it's the
Myself.
chairs and two other members. Let me just get to, let's see, Brian Thompson, who's the board chair, and he was there at the meeting. Gary Underwood, was he the guy that's head down on the end?
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
I
with
didn't say a word.
right.
Got blows.
And then Reed Penn. And Harry is the vice chair, and then Reed Penn is an executive committee member, and is a CPAC, so I guess a CPAC representative.
Okay.
So, okay, so then, I think, whatever authority you have, Rick, about making those appointments, if that's, I know you need to, at the board meeting, if we need a resolution, or, I don't know, never.
I thought I'd just bring it up tonight at the
Okay, yeah, so we get that done.
board director's items.
And then the first meeting will be in January, and actually, I just volunteered you, Jill, to be the
Okay.
person to help coordinate all of this.
I'd be delighted.
And the first meeting we're gonna do is via video conference, just to save people ramming around. So, we can talk about that.
Okay.
We can talk about that. So, let's see. All right, let's move this consolidation agreement. Let me start it, and then I'll let Tracy finish it. And I'm gonna spare you the details unless people really want them, and we'd be happy to try to go blow to blow here. It would seem that there was some mishandling of the agreement, beginning when we originally sent it to the secretary. Now, this is the agreement that both boards agreed to, the consolidation agreement, the final piece of business. And there's confusion around, the secretary's office believed that they had already approved the merger. Again, based on that letter, those letters and things we got, that just confused people. We had a call, Tracy and I did, with David Oglesby. I did skip over one part. We did have to, and again, David Oglesby, who's an attorney who works, I guess, for DMA.
He is in the DHHS contracts department.
Okay.
So he's fairly new to DHHS, he's only been there less than a year. And he is over their contracts and purchasing.
Right. So, and just step back a second here. At one point, he raised a bunch of questions, and I completed, under my signature, an affidavit, which, we just basically said, look, what do you want us to explain or say differently or whatnot? And it didn't amount to, I think to a layman, we just restated the things that were already in the agreement, thinking that would satisfy him because they were driving, what was needed. And then had a subsequent conversation with him, maybe this was about a couple weeks ago, with Tracy, where he was very apologetic around the letter not being done, and this was at the time that the secretary's father had passed away, so she was out, and he was saying, look, if she was here, we could just get this done, I'm sorry, please understand there's no issues with anything. Well, then the world changed again, I guess, this week, because, we kind of got Tracy going on, chasing after all of this, and a new person became involved, who is the general counsel for DHHS or DMA?
DHHS.
All right, I'll let you tell the story from here on in.
And I know I've met two of you, I don't know that I've met all of you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I am
Terrible.
Tracy Hayes, and I'm the new general counsel.
Bless you.
I knew your name.
Yes. So I'm very excited to
I'm
be
sorry.
here. Oh, it's okay. I'm excited to meet everybody, but, so, Brian had asked me to follow up, where is the approval? We need the approval so we can move forward with the consolidated board. And, so my contact person really is Emery Milliken, who is the general counsel for DHHS and has been for many years. So she's in the secretary's office, whereas David Oglesby is kind of lower down in the food chain, to put it, is the best way I could put it. And essentially what had happened is David had been handling this and really had not been communicating with the secretary's office. So this was, when I called her to say, where is the approval, she had not actually seen the consolidation agreement. So when she started looking at it, essentially they were fine with it. They had a concern about, there was a definition in the agreement of consolidated entity. And in that definition, it said that there was no surviving entity and that this was not a merged entity. And they were concerned about what that meant for the legal status of Smoky. And so what they had asked for was some clarification on that. So, and what they have committed is that if we can get an amendment approved by both boards, that they will approve it and it is done. And so essentially, the clarifications are, the definition of consolidated entity is now explains that consolidated entity means the surviving LME MCO for the counties of the consolidated catchment area, so all 23 counties. And that Smoky is the surviving LME MCO and will be renamed to reflect that it is a consolidated entity. The confusion was that they viewed the way it was written before was that it was becoming a whole brand new legal entity with a new tax ID, a new NPI number, which would have required them to go back to CMS and get approval for us to operate the waiver again. Whereas Smoky is already approved to operate the waiver. So they needed it to be clear that, yes, we're gonna have a new name, but we are one and the same legal entity. So that paragraph has been clarified. Then they also wanted some clarifications on the liabilities, so that it was clear who is responsible in, for lack of a better term, well, just the worst case scenario, some sort of, nuclear option, where, worst case scenario that we can think of is CMS in 2 years decides to come to an audit of all the NCOs, and they wanna look at Western's books. And they find some terrible finding that none of us can predict right now, and say that we think Western Highlands, misapplied federal funds and needs to pay back $15 million in Medicaid funds. Where is that money gonna come from and who is responsible for it? So they wanted clarification around that. And essentially, the clarification is that first it would come from the fund balance, because the fund balance that transfers from Western was a Western asset. And so any liabilities of Western have to be satisfied out of that fund balance. And that anything that cannot be satisfied out of that fund balance, the liabilities belong to Western, not to Smoky. So that is the clarification. Now, Western, of course, would have no assets in that eventuality, but they just wanted it to be clear who the liabilities belong to. That Smoky was not picking up any liability of Western, and that Smoky liabilities were not going away. So those are the clarifications that we have made. We also tried to make some clarifications around the risk reserve, and I'm waiting to hear back from them on that. But by the end of the day today, we should have an agreement on an amendment. It's gonna be about 4 pages. That if both boards will approve this amendment, then they can approve the consolidation agreement and the new board can begin to meet.
Now, there is a real silver lining in this, in terms of how Tracy has framed this, and using the Senate Bill 208 language to try to provide greater flexibility around the use of risk reserve versus fund balance. And we were on the phone, this is exactly what we were talking about when folks were coming in. Whether or not we had some conversation with DMA around this originally and they rejected it, or Lisa was asking about that, I didn't recall that. But the language that we are proposing is favorable, let's just say, in terms of the priorities of the use of the funds in a very, very big way. Now, that being said, one of the issues that was always of great concern to us was our inability to do appropriate IBNR, which is the forecasting that is used to say, basically like how much money is out there. Like when you're balancing your checkbook and you got checks out there, well, you need to consider them when you do the balance, even though they haven't been paid yet. It's really about like that. And, with all due respect to Western, they had, just a tremendous difficulty in terms of understanding their payments and the application of those payments. So we struggled for several months and had a lot of concern about what that IBNR was going to look like. In fact, we were paying claims, in July for a year previous for Western, because there was just a backlog and a lot of confusion and things. So, huge risk around how much money it's going to take. And the final estimation of that IBNR is probably more conservative than we had anticipated. So it's likely that for the payment of funds, hopefully we won't even ever have to touch risk reserve or fund balance. And again, this is just the final piece that's only come into focus in the last probably couple weeks. So, long and the short of it, Tracy's been going back and forth the last 2 or 3 days
That's who I was on the phone with, I'm sorry.
with Emory, and I'd say we're about this close.
Yes, they want to speak to one of the finance people at DMA to make sure. But what they have proposed is that they would send us a letter that just, it says, "Dear Mr. Ingram, upon execution of the attached amendment, I approve the dissolution of Western Highlands Network LME and merger with Smoky Mountain Center LME." So that we can get that letter signed by the
Can
secretary.
you look for that second one?
Yes.
Well, I'm not
They
sure.
knew that the board
Or
was
they
meeting,
send them away, or,
they knew
Nice.
that the board was meeting today, and they were very committed to trying to have something for you all before you left at the end of the day.
that's,
So that-
that's what I put together.
In lieu of receiving the amendment that
Correct.
would be agreed to,
Right.
it would still have to be executed. Like, this is a board, and, you know, whether I sign it or Rick signs it, or, and Chuck, obviously, on the western side, that'd be under your signature.
And as soon as I have something, I would send it to Vic,
Yeah.
so.
You know, the one thing I'd just say, we didn't do anything wrong here. You know, this has been, just terribly handled. I mean, all of these conversations, whatever questions anybody had, you know, these are the discussions we could have had in September, much less October instead of December, and having all these other activities happen in between that basically became irrelevant until, you know, beginning this week.
You know, you were the first MCO to go through this, and I just don't think the department really had a process for how to handle it.
So the timing of our new change our board is okay. We did this, we
Yeah.
let the board know that
Yeah.
January is the last meeting and then the, okay.
So all of that
Fits.
does work.
Okay.
And we could, you know, the last thing I want is for anybody to have any confusion about any of this. You know, we'll spend as much time as we need to explaining it, you know, going through the amendment. It's as Tracy said, that's what we can tell you.
Okay.
Brian, it's Carl. Can we get a review? It's hard to hear all the things the attorney said. Can we get that review in writing to provide our county attorney, especially those of us from Western?
Of course.
Sure.
You know, and as soon as we get the, I guess, the final verbal agreement on the amendment, you know, we'll give that to anybody that wants it, I mean, everybody.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I mean, we could have, I mean, we'll do any way you want it. We could have a conference call, go over it, whatever anybody would want to do.
Brian, my issue was relating to her comments, and I really couldn't hear clearly about the liabilities of Western and those not being assumed. How those relate, and you know, making sure our auditors look at those from the Western to make sure that we've got enough assets on hand from the old Western to cover the liabilities. And that's frankly what I'm concerned about.
Sure. Essentially, the way it's worded is that the fund balance would be used to pay out any and all closeout obligations. And my understanding from Lisa is that the fund balance is more than sufficient to address that. The liabilities the department is concerned about are unknown liabilities. These are potential future liabilities in the event there were some kind of audit by CMS. And none of us can know what that could be, and none of us can know how much of that could be covered by the tail coverage that was purchased. There's the potential that it could cover it, but there's also the potential that the insurance company could say, no, we are not responsible for an audit finding. So this is, again, this is just, really just worst case scenario, but the department felt that it was better to have this clarified up front rather than waiting for the worst case scenario to happen and then everybody pointing fingers to try and determine who's responsible.
Well, the issue is, we know the 8 counties that would be responsible. And what I'm wondering, is there any way that, I know I'm probably singing to, heaven here, that, and there's no way it'll happen, but is there any way they'll at least acknowledge that we could use the risk reserve to cover any of those unknown liabilities?
That's what I was just on the phone with them about, and they are they have gone back and they're speaking with the finance people at DMA to find out. The risk reserve is very prescribed by the state's waiver with CMS on what those risk reserve dollars can be used for. So, that's what they've gone back to get some clarity on.
Yeah.
But essentially, again, this is all worst-case scenario, and, you know, to be very honest with you, Lisa and Julie and I discussed last night, you know, what is the likelihood of a worst-case scenario like this? And, you know, we do think it is pretty small, that any audit finding could exceed the fund balance. But it's all,
I won't make the bumper sticker comment about DHHS that I want to, but I'll just say thank you very much.
understood.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
so we'll, you know, and by the time of the board meeting, we could have more information, but that's basically the rundown.
Okay.
Okay. Revising public image, Pinehurst County, CMS letter, future board meeting. Revising public image. You know, this became one of those things that as we were, you know, doing this whole big transition, you know, we kept saying, you know, we really need to get to this, we really need to get to this, because, you know, we're not Smoky Mountain Center anymore. In fact, even in the amendment, you know, we're stating that the organization will be renamed, and that was always an agreement we had with the Western folks anyway. And my kind of way around this, because I didn't have a good way of taking this on at the time, was to say, well, look, let's wait until we get the new board, and then that'll be a good activity for, you know, that board to be engaged with, which really, you know, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but there's a lot of truth in that, because that really does kind of represent the, you know, the new organization, the completion of the transition of the new organization. And then, you know, things got delayed with that. Long story short, and part of this actually has to do with, you know, without Shelley, there's a lot of things that, you know, she does that would be related to these kinds of activities, and we've been, you know, sorely missing her. We've contracted with a public relations and marketing firm that's called Edelman. And I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're actually I believe they're the world's largest PR firm, and very interesting background. You can look them up on Wikipedia or look at their website. I would refer to them by colleagues at Cardinal, and very, very impressive folks. I mean, they have a healthcare division. You know, and again, if you want to do some name dropping, some of their clients are Starbucks, Microsoft, General Electric, the country of Saudi Arabia. I mean, they're
Edelman is her name?
Edelman, Edelman. It's actually started by a couple of brothers.
I've heard of
Yeah, just very impressive. So we have begun working with them on creating an overarching communication plan, a marketing or branding effort, and of course associated with that is, you know, a new name and logo. And the best thing to do would be to have them come to a meeting and really talk about all of the work we've done. You know, every time I meet with them, it's just that they're very impressive. You know, they know what they're doing, far beyond, you know, what we could even ever conceive of course. And it's just another area, you know, as this organization grows and becomes more professional, it's just, this is an area where we haven't kept pace with ourselves, to be honest. So getting their help has been a real great shot in the arm.
Brian, can I suggest something to you about that?
Sure.
Because the Jackson County Travel and Development Authority recently did the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They hired a PR company to retool it and come up with a brand, come up with a name, and they did. But one of the things that they failed to do and failed to understand, there's a $50,000 fee that we paid the company, was, is this gonna be copyrightable? Is this a trademark that we can have? Because as soon as they invented the name, the branding logo was called Play On, and as soon as the next county over found out about it, they started using the word Play On because they thought it was pretty cool too. And so we said to the company, why don't you make them stop? They said, we can't. We said, well, it's not copyrighted, it's not trademarked, it's not protected in any way. So whatever we do, we need to make sure that legally speaking, we get the rights for whatever they come up with, and somebody can't take it away from you immediately after it's invented.
We'll get our legal team right on that. And of course, there's a whole process that you go through of, searching to be sure that whatever you do choose, you can own and, all of that. But, yeah, I hear you. So just to let you know, there's been a lot of work going on with that. Very impressive bunch, and we just have to get that into the queue in terms of the work we do with the board and CFAC, and they're because they have done this work in North Carolina already. They understand their business, and they understand the landscape of healthcare. They understand the political landscape. I mean, there's not much they don't really understand about what we're doing and all the pieces to it. So. Been a pleasure to work with. So, that's that. Pinehurst Conference, well, what do you think? You guys can say what you like about it.
I thought it was a very informative conference. I thought our meeting with the other organizations was a good first meeting. About an hour and a half. Judy Poe, Ed, Dorothy, and the ever popular Ronnie Bill. Who else? Is there anybody other? And myself. We were all at the retreat, and I thought it was a good session, some good training, Mark Potts. And I enjoyed what you fellows guys think.
Yeah, I think David Swan done an excellent job too. He's very good.
We have all of the material that they used. We've downloaded it all so we can adapt, and use pieces of that and kind of work up our own training. That would be part of what we do at the retreat.
Speaking on behalf of the council, it sure was a very successful conference for us. Last year we had approximately 625 people registered. This year we had between 750 and 800. We had 100 exhibitions or stalls that were rented out. It was just an outstanding conference from our standpoint. To have the secretary there and have Representative Dollar there to speak to. At the opening plenary, we had Dollar. At the closing plenary, we had the secretary there. Then we were, and had a lot of her staff there also to speak with us. And she also comes to our board meeting held Friday morning. So, from the council's point of view, it was a very successful conference.
I think Secretary Moss made it very clear the direction the state's going as far as considering fewer MCOs.
She didn't mince words on that.
I think it was
You see the press release from a couple days ago?
Yeah.
Got a map and everything.
We're gonna have
It's in
in the packet, okay, you can see in your packet. This came out, Tuesday afternoon. And really what they did was they copied, the council sent a letter at the request of, I will say, the secretary, or Dave, Do we have that letter too?
Yes, it's in the board packet.
Okay.
It went
It's-
out. It's in your.
Basically, this press release is a restatement of the letter that went from the council to the secretary. And, that was, they wanted some proof that we were on board with the whole idea of regionalization. So, that was done, and all the MCOs, more or less signed off on that. So this was the announcement, and it has the map that, we've been secretly looking at for months. Yeah, and it's in the board packet?
Yes, it's in the board packet. It's right behind the rate letter, letter documentation, it's right
Just like
behind
that.
that.
So, anyway. Yeah, quite a turnaround. Quite a turnaround.
One thing I thought was interesting about our conversation with Parker and Centerpoint, they both have already reconstituted their boards. And there was discussion about a number of things, just real general, but it's interesting, I believe Ronnie brought up about having commissioners, and they didn't seem to, as far as representation, it didn't seem to matter to them. As long as there were people on the board that they were, could be responsible, it was a good exchange, I thought. Good place to start.
So, that was Pinehurst.
Okay.
A lot of, I guess 800, is that the total number, something like that?
Close to
That's a big
800,
crowd. I think that's about the biggest crowd I've ever seen.
It was
I've
the
been going
largest
for
crowd
10
that
years.
largest crowd we've had.
Yeah.
I don't have the final numbers, but Mayor will have to do this week sometime.
Okay. Also in the packet, I can refer you to the, each month, we have committed to doing an update on the Western Region activities, and you see it in there. And look like that. So that's there. In fact, I need to get this out to the staff. I don't know that there's anything in here that is, much different, new. Give you a chance to, the working timeline will be to go live with a new entity no later than July 1st, 2016. Well, one of the CEOs was very public about stating that, and so it's in there. If that's true, okay. If it becomes something different, it's, the timetable is a very uncertain collection of dates and activities, I would say. That's as good a date as any. And that continues to be one of the major difficulties in doing this. We're planning with no timeline and no specific, I'll say, goal in sight. So, which is nothing new. That's kind of where we've been with this. And I think we have the data points chart in there as well. One of the things that's going to be added to that are the number of providers and how many there are in common. I don't know that if I have it here. It's really interesting.
There's 75.
There's a lot. Oh, here it is. All right, between all three, see if I can get this right, between all three MCOs, there's 75 providers in common. Okay? There are 39 providers who serve both CenterPoint and partners. There are 22 who serve CenterPoint and Smoky. There are 166 who serve partners and Smoky. Okay, so that would be above and beyond the 75. So you can see, there's a lot of mutual agency service delivery with Smokey and Partners. I mean, by far, 5 times, what it is, 4 or 5 times what it is with Centerpoint. So, we're gonna add that to it. And what else? CMS letter. There was an article in the Winston-Salem Journal, and Judy, thanks for the email. There's a couple articles in there. It remains to be seen. DHHS is, that's one of the things the secretary did talk about a lot, and just their statement was that they were very surprised to receive it, had been having a lot of communication with them that was very positive, and this just came out of the blue. I think what this boils down to is that, and in fact Tracy worked with Tara previously, that these same questions have been raised before and successfully defended for North Carolina. So why now? Well, maybe the reason is with the expansion of Medicaid, more
Have they been raised with CMS before?
Yes,
They have?
yes.
Maybe, and it certainly would make sense that there would be greater oversight of the Medicaid program. You have different people, different administration. So that's probably the why now, and there are, 2 other states, Pennsylvania and Michigan?
Washington.
Washington, that's right. So to me, the question becomes, can this administration come up with the same responses? And, I guess there's been unofficial offers to help with that, if anybody will take them up on it, from Tracy and Tara. And I guess we'll see how that, how that works out. You'd like to assume that they could create those same arguments, but does that mean they're gonna work this time? Who knows? I think that's about all you can say about it right now. The only other piece, and Tracy, you can comment whatever you would like here. It seems that the first 2 letters to the other states were much more harsh than ours, and it's not really a slam down kind of letter where you gotta do this, or here's your drop dead date, and you're dead in the water. It certainly is pretty soft on acknowledging that this is a major change, would take a lot of time. It doesn't look like anybody's looking for blood, but
Yeah, the other 2 states have already responded because they got their letters much earlier. And the letters the circumstances are very similar. They're making the same argument. And those states had the same response, which was, we previously went over this with you and you approved exactly the scenario that we have. And you knew that these were local institutes of government, and you knew what they were doing, and you knew all that when you approved the waiver. So there's some thought that they moderated the letter since they'd already gotten those responses from the other 2 states. And there's also a thought that this is an internal federal fight, that you have CMS doing something that the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, which is what issues that circular, doesn't agree with. And that these are 2 federal agencies having a disagreement about the interpretation of Circular 887.
and we're in the crossfire.
Yeah.
So,
Intention is a lot higher.
Yes.
that's, you can read the paper, or if we hear anything more, we'll let you know. That's the latest there. And maybe, future board executive meeting schedule, you handed that out. What else?
Next meeting will be January 23rd. This will be our next executive committee. We don't know where we'll be yet. Right.
January 23rd.
Yes.
It will be at the, if you still want it, at the Buncombe County. We just couldn't do it this time because they were already committed.
That'd be good.
Anything else?
Executive committee meeting 1.
No, we covered a lot.
Yeah. Okay, I think that covers us.
Yeah, you know what, there is one other thing, and it's on the, I guess I forgot to put it on here. Because we've got a few minutes. We are really struggling with DMA around some issues related to our rate, the establishment of our rate. And there's a collection of issues. I think the best way to summarize it, one has to do with the expense associated with the transition of the contract from Western to Smoky. And the long and the short of that is it's cost about $4 million. I mean, that's what we anticipate being the price tag on that. And that's a really good number. You know, we've presented that to the folks in the Mercer, and really hasn't been any rebuffing of that. Unfortunately, whether it just has never been anticipated or what, I'm not sure. There is no mechanism with the transfer of these contracts to address the cost, the administrative cost that's associated with it. So once again, you know, as Tracy said, you know, we're going first with this. You know, who's responsible for all of that? And we had a lot of discussions about this very, very early on, in the beginning. In fact, with the initial, whatever it was called, the transition plan, which was kind of an informal, you know, document that I think technically came from Western to the secretary. You know, Tara and Lanier were real helpful with that document. You know, we said right up front, you know, this is going to cost a lot of money. While they acknowledge that it's very real and have proposed some solutions for how those costs could be recovered, you know, we still don't have anything other than, you know, it coming out of the Smoky and Western fund balance. We don't have a way for anyone else to share in that. We're going to continue to talk with the state about that. There are some ways they could have dealt with it that would have lightened that load, and to date they have not chosen those. So we're going to continue to follow up on that. And other than that, I think we have some just real disagreements around and it's really the projections and the modeling they've done about the Smoky rate from January forward. And again, thinking about the effect of Accountable Care Act, even though we're not a Medicaid expansion state, there's, you know, this prediction around a woodworking effect where more people would become Medicaid eligible and what the characteristics of their expenses would be. You know, Mercer has interpreted that one way, and other folks have interpreted it in a very different way. So we're going to challenge that position. And then finally, I'm just going to say the left hand not knowing what the right is doing, and rates that are accepted, I guess would be the right term, by DMA in certain cases of institutions. And this is kind of a holdover from the old world. And we're, to some degree, required to honor those rates, but we're now being put in a corner around that in a way that just we don't believe is fair, and we've called the question. And, well, we've been given an opportunity to come to Raleigh on 4 o'clock tomorrow to tell them all about that. So that's what we're going to do.
4 o'clock on Friday afternoon.
I mean, there's a lot more we can say about all of this. It's, there's some, you know, this is just one of those things that, there's parts of this just aren't right. And, you know, how hard are we gonna push? And I think, you know, what I thought about this morning, and I'm kind of on the fence about whether trying to call Dave and say, Dave, I mean, you're making us go show that you don't know what you're doing with some of this. I mean,
People asking questions for about 7 or 8 months.
yeah, well, I mean, we've kept really good records. We've just communicated very clearly. I mean, we've got tremendous backup. I mean, other than them just trying to, put it in a black hole, which is what they've done so far,
Are all the CEOs invited back tomorrow?
we're going this one ourselves. I just don't think the others, I don't know, and people have asked about this. I think we probably understand this at a level of, dare I say, sophistication that's maybe, I don't know. Are we more able to find the mistakes and the problems? Possibly. I think we're just not satisfied, and other folks are so up to their eyeballs with other things that maybe, they don't choose to protest so much. I know others have, but haven't gone to the point of, and again, whether or not this is officially a reconsideration request or what, I don't know, but we've taken this further than anyone else. And we're on good ground. And Tracy, you're happy to say anything more?
We're prepared at least. We've got a pretty detailed timeline that we've prepared of, all the steps that have taken us to this meeting. We have some studies, we even, we have some information about the woodwork effect and some information that's coming out from other states. Separate, even though we chose not to expand Medicaid, there is still the woodwork effect of Medicaid enrollment is expected to be higher just based on publicity and more people realizing that it's a benefit they're eligible for. The estimate was that it'd be about 150,000 more people sign up for Medicaid, just who were already eligible, just didn't know it. And what other states are finding is that those individuals come into the program with very high behavioral health needs. And it doesn't appear to us that that has been captured in Mercer's calculations for the rate. They predict decreased utilization instead of increased utilization.
Actually, I challenged, I say challenged, I asked Mercer about this when we had our rate meeting, our official meeting to talk about the rate, and they said, well, we're quoting SAMHSA studies and based on our experience in other states and da-da-da, and I just said, okay. And, now we're a little further down the road, and those features don't seem to be holding up in other states, contrary to what Mercer said to us. And the other just has to do with, so they've opened up our rate to reduce the capitation as a result of this, which is, you might say, is that unprecedented? What ability do they have to do that? And I've yet to get an answer to that question. There's other rates and things that happen during the year that change, there are changes. And for example, this institutional rate issue. Well, when those rates increased, they didn't stop the music and go and change our rates and increase them to reflect that. Well, how come we get to this? It's like I said, you could, no matter which way you want to turn this around, there's parts of this that are just not right. So,
4 o'clock on Friday.
yeah. That's where we're headed tomorrow.
Friday.
Christmas shopping done early.
Oh, yeah. It's nothing like an 8-hour road trip for being there an hour and a half.
So you'll be back here at 11 or something.
Go team.
Is there anything
So,
else?
nope.
We adjourn?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, guys on the phone.
Thank
Meeting is
you.
adjourned.
Yep,
See ya.
appreciate what y'all are doing.
Thank you.
Downstairs.
Jill, you want me to do that, Larry?
Oh, the,